Sometimes the smallest creature at your doorstep is carrying the biggest secret in the kingdom. The storm rolled across Blackwood Ridge like a living thing, rattling the tall windows of the royal estate and painting the night in flashes of silver light. Ethan Blackwood stood alone in his study, one hand resting against the cool stone fireplace while rain hammered the roof above him. As Alpha King, he was used to long nights filled with reports, disputes, and endless responsibilities. Yet tonight felt different. The air carried a strange tension he couldn't explain. A sharp crack of thunder shook the estate. Then came another sound. Soft, faint, almost impossible to hear beneath the storm. Ethan lifted his head. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. Then it came again. A weak scratching at the front door. His brow furrowed. Nobody traveled these mountain roads during weather like this. Grabbing a lantern from the nearby table, he crossed the silent hallway and made his way toward the entrance. The scratching had stopped. Only the wind remained, howling through the pine trees beyond the estate walls. Ethan pulled open the heavy oak door. Cold rain swept inside immediately. At first he saw nothing. Then his gaze dropped. A small white cat lay curled against the stone steps. Its fur was soaked from the storm, clinging tightly to its fragile frame. Mud streaked its sides. One ear was torn slightly from some old hardship. It looked exhausted beyond words. The cat barely moved when the lantern light touched its face. But its eyes opened. Ethan froze. They were not the eyes of an ordinary animal. Pale gray, intelligent, afraid. For a brief second, he had the unsettling feeling that someone was looking back at him from behind those eyes. Someone who understood everything. The cat tried to stand. Its legs trembled beneath it. Then it collapsed again. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You picked the right house," he muttered. Carefully, he crouched and lifted the small creature into his arms. The cat didn't resist. It simply rested its head against his coat as another wave of rain swept across the mountain. Back inside, warmth immediately filled the hallway. Ethan carried the cat to a guest sitting room and wrapped it in a soft blanket near the fire. A servant would normally handle something like this, but it was well past midnight. Besides, something about the animal held his attention. As the fire crackled, the cat slowly opened its eyes again. It watched him constantly. Every movement, every expression. Ethan poured water into a small bowl and set it nearby. The cat drank carefully before settling once more beside the hearth. "Looks like you've had a rough journey," he said. The cat blinked. For an odd moment, it almost looked sad. Hours passed. The storm gradually weakened outside. Ethan returned to reviewing documents while the cat slept near the fire. Yet every so often he found himself glancing over. And each time, those gray eyes were already watching him. Near dawn, the fire had burned low. The estate remained silent. Ethan stood and stretched before moving to add another log. Behind him came a soft metallic sound. Clink. He turned immediately. The cat was sitting upright now. Something small rested on the floor beside its paw. Ethan stepped closer. His heartbeat slowed, then stopped. Lying against the wooden floorboards was a silver ring. A royal signet ring. The same design used by the royal family decades ago. A design that had vanished after the death of the previous king. Ethan stared at the ring, then at the cat. The cat stared back. And for the first time, genuine fear crept into the Alpha King's chest. The ring remained on Ethan's desk long after sunrise, catching the pale morning light each time he glanced in its direction. He had examined it 3 times already and found no explanation that satisfied him. The silver had aged naturally. The royal crest engraved into its surface was authentic. And yet that was impossible. The signet belonged to a collection that had disappeared years ago. Ethan stood near the tall windows overlooking the mountain forest while servants quietly prepared the estate for the day. Behind him, the white cat slept on a cushioned chair beside the fireplace. At least, it appeared to be sleeping. Every now and then one ear twitched as if it were listening to every conversation in the room. The thought made him uneasy. By mid-morning, word of the mysterious ring had reached only a handful of trusted staff. Ethan intended to keep it that way. Rumors spread quickly inside royal circles, and he had no interest in inviting speculation. He picked up the ring again and turned it slowly between his fingers. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. The cat opened its eyes. For a moment, those pale gray eyes settled on the ring before shifting back to him. Ethan almost laughed at himself. He was asking questions of a cat, yet something about the animal continued to feel wrong. Not dangerous, just strange, as though it carried a story it could not tell. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Your Majesty," a servant announced. "Lord Victor Hawthorne has arrived." Ethan nodded automatically. Victor Hawthorne was more than an advisor. He had helped guide the kingdom through difficult years and had been one of the few constants in Ethan's life since childhood. If anyone could help identify the ring, it would be him. "Show him in." Moments later, Victor entered the study dressed in his usual dark coat. His silver hair was neatly combed despite the long journey from the capital. "You wish to see me?" he asked. Ethan gestured toward the desk. "Take a look at this." Victor stepped closer. The moment he entered the room, something unexpected happened. A low sound emerged from behind Ethan. Not loud, not threatening, just enough to draw attention. Ethan turned. The cat was no longer resting. It stood rigid on the chair, every muscle tense beneath its white fur. Its ears flattened instantly. Its eyes locked onto Victor. Fear. Real fear. Ethan felt it immediately. The reaction was impossible to ignore. Victor paused. "Interesting animal," he remarked. The cat backed away another step. Ethan frowned. "That is unusual." Victor offered a polite smile. "Perhaps it simply dislikes strangers." Maybe. Yet Ethan knew animals. Wolves especially. Fear had a scent. A posture. A weight. This was not the reaction of a creature meeting someone for the first time. It looked more like recognition. Victor studied the ring while the cat remained frozen across the room. Several minutes passed before the advisor finally shook his head. "I cannot explain it," he admitted. "It appears genuine." Ethan glanced toward the cat again. It had not looked away from Victor once. Not even for a second. Eventually, the meeting ended. Victor excused himself and departed for the capital before noon. The front gates closed behind his carriage. Only then did the cat relax. Slowly, carefully, as if waiting to ensure he was truly gone. Ethan watched from the window. A chill moved through him despite the warmth of the room. The cat jumped from the chair and approached the desk. Then, without hesitation, it placed one paw directly on top of the ring. Ethan stared. The animal looked up at him. Those pale gray eyes seemed filled with urgency, almost like a warning. And for the first time, Ethan found himself wondering whether the ring was not the real mystery at all. Maybe the mystery was the creature that had brought it. The question stayed with Ethan for the rest of the day. Why would an ordinary animal fear Victor Hawthorne so intensely? By evening, the unease had settled deep enough that he could no longer ignore it. The white cat remained close to him wherever he went through the estate. It followed him through the library, sat quietly during meetings, and watched every doorway, as if expecting something to happen. More than once, Ethan caught members of the household commenting on how unusual the creature seemed. None of them knew the half of it. Shortly after sunset, Ethan returned to the private archives hidden beneath the west wing of the estate. Few people knew the room existed. Generations of records filled floor-to-ceiling shelves carved directly into the mountain stone. If the ring truly belonged to a forgotten chapter of royal history, the answer might be waiting there. He lit several oil lamps and began searching through old ledgers, court records, and correspondence dating back decades. Dust drifted through the golden light as hours passed. The cat remained nearby, perched on a wooden chair, observing him with its familiar gray eyes. Midnight approached when Ethan discovered something strange. A thin archive binder had been filed incorrectly among records from nearly 15 years earlier. He pulled it free and opened the cover. Inside were reports connected to a royal investigation that had quietly disappeared from public memory. Ethan frowned as he scanned the pages. The documents referenced an incident that occurred 3 years ago. Several witnesses had vanished. Official inquiries had been closed unexpectedly. Entire sections had been marked confidential. His pulse quickened. Someone had worked very hard to bury these records. Then he saw a name. Claire Whitmore. Ethan paused. The name appeared repeatedly throughout the file. Claire Whitmore, 21 years old. Omega. Employed as an assistant within the Royal Records Department. Last known residence listed in the capital. Status, missing. Ethan turned another page. Missing for exactly 3 years. The same week the investigation had abruptly ended. He leaned back in his chair. Something about the timing felt wrong. Coincidences existed, but years of leadership had taught him not to trust them. He continued reading. Claire had reportedly disappeared without explanation. No body had ever been found. No farewell letter. No confirmed sightings. It was as if she had simply vanished from the world. The room remained silent except for the turning of pages. Then a soft sound broke the stillness. Ethan looked up. The cat was standing now. Not sitting. Not resting. Standing. Its eyes were fixed on the file in his hands. Slowly, it stepped closer. Ethan felt a chill move through him. The cat approached the desk and placed both front paws directly on the page where Claire Whitmore's name appeared. For several seconds, neither moved. Ethan stared at the animal. The animal stared back. "You know this name," he whispered. The cat's ears twitched. It lowered its head and touched the paper lightly with its nose. Once. Then again. Ethan's heartbeat accelerated. Rationally, he knew what he was seeing should mean nothing. Animals could not read. They could not understand historical investigations. Yet the reaction felt deliberate, purposeful, almost desperate. He glanced down at the report once more. Missing Omega. 3 years ago. Connected to a hidden investigation. Connected somehow to a royal signet ring that should not exist. And now connected to a cat that behaved less like an animal and more like someone trapped inside a mystery. The silence stretched between them. Then the cat suddenly turned toward another shelf deeper inside the archive. Before Ethan could react, it jumped from the desk and disappeared into the shadows between the rows of records. Ethan rose immediately and followed. By the time he reached the back corner, the cat was waiting beside a narrow section of stone wall he had never noticed before. And hidden behind a shelf that had not been moved in years was the outline of a sealed door. The hidden door looked as though it had not been opened in years. Dust coated its edges. Thin cracks stretched through the surrounding stone. Even the iron handle had darkened with age. Ethan stood motionless in the narrow archive corridor while the cat waited beside the wall. The small animal watched him expectantly, as if it had finally led him to the place he was meant to find. "What is this?" Ethan whispered. No record of a sealed room existed in the estate blueprints. He knew because he had studied them personally after inheriting Blackwood Ridge. Yet here it was, hidden behind forgotten shelves and buried beneath years of neglect. Carefully, he reached for the handle. The metal resisted at first. Then, with a low groan, the door slowly swung inward. Cool air drifted out from the darkness beyond. Ethan lifted one of the oil lamps and stepped inside. The room was small, perhaps 15 feet across, with stone walls and a single wooden desk positioned beneath a narrow window. Moonlight filtered through the dusty glass. The beam of pale light illuminated countless particles floating through the air like silver snow. The chamber looked untouched, a forgotten place frozen in time. Behind him, the cat entered quietly and immediately moved toward the desk. Ethan followed. Several objects remained exactly where someone had left them years ago. A stack of papers, a faded journal, an old map of the capital. Most interesting of all was a wooden lockbox resting in the center of the desk. Ethan examined it carefully before lifting the lid. Inside were documents tied together with a blue ribbon. The top page immediately caught his attention. It contained a list of names, government officials, advisors, royal administrators, people who had held important positions throughout the kingdom. Some names were marked with notes. Others were connected by handwritten lines. Ethan recognized several immediately. One name stood out more than the rest. Victor Hawthorne. Ethan stared at it. The name had been circled multiple times. Beneath it, someone had written a short message. "Watch him." The handwriting looked hurried, nervous, as though the writer had feared running out of time. Ethan felt tension gather in his chest. He continued searching through the papers. More notes appeared. Dates, meeting locations, fragments of conversations. None of it was enough to prove wrongdoing. But together they painted a troubling picture. Someone had been conducting a private investigation. Someone had believed a dangerous secret existed inside the royal government. Then Ethan found the journal. The leather cover had faded with age. He carefully opened the first page. His pulse quickened instantly. Written inside was a name. Claire Whitmore. The missing Omega. Ethan sat down heavily in the chair beside the desk. The cat jumped onto the surface and remained close while he turned the pages. Claire's entries described ordinary work at first. Records, schedules, administrative duties. But as the journal continued, the tone changed. She began mentioning unusual meetings, missing files, conversations that seemed innocent on the surface, yet left her feeling uneasy. Ethan read faster. The final entries became increasingly urgent. Claire believed someone was manipulating official records. She feared evidence was being erased. More importantly, she believed certain individuals were working together in secret. The last completed entry ended abruptly. 3 short sentences. I finally found proof. They know I am asking questions. If anything happens to me, trust no one. Ethan slowly lowered the journal. Silence filled the hidden room. The cat remained beside him, watching every movement. Then a sudden noise echoed. Somewhere beyond the archive walls. A distant door closing. Ethan looked up immediately. So did the cat. The animal's body stiffened. Its ears flattened. Fear returned to those pale gray eyes. The same fear he had seen when Victor entered the study. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Someone else was awake inside Blackwood Ridge. And somehow, he had the unsettling feeling that whoever it was already knew this hidden room had been discovered. The sound never came again. Ethan remained inside the hidden chamber for nearly 10 minutes, listening carefully while the cat stood frozen beside the desk. Nothing moved beyond the stone walls. No footsteps. No voices. Eventually, the silence became almost unsettling. Yet the feeling of being watched refused to leave him. At dawn, Ethan carried the journal, the documents, and the ring back to his private study. He locked everything inside a secured cabinet known only to him. The cat followed closely the entire time. By now, the servants had become accustomed to seeing the white animal near the Alpha King. Some even smiled when it wandered through the halls. None of them realized how deeply it had become connected to a mystery buried beneath years of secrecy. Throughout the morning, Ethan reviewed Claire Whitmore's journal again. The more he read, the more questions emerged. Claire had clearly discovered something important, something significant enough to frighten her. Yet every clue seemed to stop just before revealing the truth. He rubbed his eyes and leaned back in frustration. "Who were you, Claire?" he murmured. At the sound of her name, the cat immediately lifted its head. Ethan froze. Slowly, he repeated it. "Claire Whitmore." The reaction was impossible to miss. The cat stood and approached his desk. Not cautiously, not curiously, purposefully. It stared directly at him. Then it placed one paw on top of the journal. Ethan felt a strange sensation move through his chest. Over the past few days, dozens of unusual events had accumulated. The ring, the fear of Victor, the hidden room, the journal, the missing Omega. Separately, each mystery might have been explained away. Together, they pointed towards something much larger. "Hey!" Knock interrupted his thoughts. Before Ethan could answer, the study door opened. An elderly woman stepped inside. Her silver hair was braided neatly down her back. A dark blue cloak rested across her shoulders. The moment Ethan saw her, he stood respectfully. "Lady Miriam." Miriam Ashcroft offered a gentle smile. Among the kingdom's oldest scholars, she was known for her expertise in ancient magic, forgotten traditions, and supernatural phenomena. If anyone could help explain the impossible events surrounding the cat, it was her. "You sounded concerned in your message," she said. Ethan nodded. "I need your opinion on something unusual." Her gaze settled on the cat almost immediately. The smile vanished from her face. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then her expression changed completely. Shock, disbelief, recognition. Ethan noticed it instantly. "You know something." Miriam moved closer to the animal. The cat remained perfectly still. The elderly scholar slowly knelt despite her age. Her eyes softened. "How long?" she whispered. The cat lowered its head. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "Lady Miriam?" She looked up at him. "Your Majesty, where did you find her?" Ethan blinked. "Her. Not it. Her." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What do you mean?" Miriam rose carefully. "Because this is not an ordinary animal." Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. The scholar extended one trembling hand toward the cat. A faint silver glow appeared around her fingertips. Soft, harmless, gentle as moonlight. The cat closed its eyes. For one brief moment, the glow spread across its white fur. Symbols shimmered beneath the surface like reflections trapped under ice. Ancient markings. Hidden markings. Then they vanished. Silence filled the study. Miriam exhaled slowly. "I was afraid of this." Ethan stared at her. "Afraid of what?" The elderly scholar looked directly into his eyes. "Your Majesty, this cat is not a cat at all." The room seemed to stop breathing. Miriam turned toward the animal once more. 3 years ago, someone used forbidden magic." Her voice softened. "The missing Omega you have been searching for never disappeared." Ethan felt every muscle in his body tense. The scholar's next words changed everything. Claire Whitmore has been standing beside you this entire time. For several long seconds, Ethan could not speak. He looked from Lady Miriam to the white cat sitting quietly beside his desk. Nothing about the small creature appeared different. It was the same animal he had carried inside during the storm. The same companion that followed him through the estate. Yet suddenly every strange moment made sense. The intelligence in those pale gray eyes. The fear of Victor Hawthorne. The reaction to Claire Whitmore's name. None of it had been coincidence. Claire lowered her head as though exhausted by the truth finally being spoken aloud. Miriam approached carefully and rested one hand against the back of the chair. The spell is ancient, she explained quietly. Rare enough that most scholars believe it no longer exists. It transforms the victim while preserving memory and consciousness. The body changes, but the mind remains trapped. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. 3 years. Claire had spent 3 years unable to speak, unable to explain, unable to tell anyone what had happened. He looked at her differently now, not as a mysterious animal, not as a curiosity, but as a person who had endured something unimaginable. Can it be reversed? He asked. Miriam hesitated. That single pause worried him more than any answer. Possibly. Ethan frowned. Possibly. The scholar nodded slowly. The curse is weakening. I can feel it. Whoever cast it intended to silence her, but powerful magic rarely lasts forever. Small cracks have already formed. As if responding to her words, a sudden shimmer passed through the room. Ethan noticed it immediately. Silver light flickered around Claire's body. The cat jumped down from the desk and stumbled slightly. Miriam inhaled sharply. It is happening. Ethan moved forward instinctively. The glow intensified. Moonlight streaming through the study windows seemed to gather around Claire like mist. The air felt strangely warm. Then, just as suddenly, the light expanded. Ethan shielded his eyes. When the brightness faded, silence filled the room. Standing where the cat had been was a young woman. She looked unsteady, as though her legs barely remembered how to support her. Pale blonde hair fell across her shoulders. Her skin appeared almost luminous beneath the fading silver light. Her gray eyes remained exactly the same eyes that had watched Ethan from the fireplace, the same eyes that had carried fear, sadness, and determination. Claire Whitmore. Real. Alive. Ethan stared in disbelief. Claire looked equally overwhelmed. She touched her own face as if confirming it was real. Her fingers trembled. A tear slipped down her cheek. Her voice cracked instantly. 3 years without speaking had left the sound weak and unfamiliar. She swallowed hard. I can talk. The words barely rose above a whisper, yet they seemed louder than thunder. Ethan felt something unexpected in his chest. Relief. Claire laughed softly through her tears. Not because anything was funny, because after 3 years of silence, hearing her own voice felt like a miracle. Miriam smiled gently. The transformation is temporary. Claire nodded. I know. Her voice grew steadier. It only lasts a few minutes. Ethan stepped closer. 1,000 questions filled his mind, but only one mattered. Claire, he said carefully, what happened to you? The joy vanished from her face immediately. Fear replaced it. Real fear. Claire looked toward the study door, then toward the windows, as if expecting someone to be listening. I found something, she whispered. 3 years ago. Something I was never supposed to see. Ethan remained silent. Claire's hands tightened. I tried to report it. I thought the right people would help. Her eyes filled with regret. I was wrong. The silver light around her began flickering again. The curse was returning. Time was running out. Ethan could see the panic on her face. She had waited years to tell the truth. Now only minutes remained. Claire looked directly into his eyes. The person behind everything is still close to you. The light brightened. Her form began to blur. And if they discover I am alive. Her voice broke off as the transformation reclaimed her. Moments later, the white cat sat where Claire had stood. The room fell. Silent. But her warning remained. Someone near Ethan had destroyed lives to hide a secret. And that person still believed Claire Whitmore could never speak. Sleep became impossible after Claire's warning. Long after midnight, Ethan remained seated in his study while the white cat rested quietly beside the fireplace. The estate had fallen silent. Only the occasional crackle of burning would disturb the darkness. Yet Ethan's thoughts refused to settle. Someone close to him. Those words repeated endlessly in his mind. Throughout his life, He had built his kingdom on trust. Advisors, council members, friends, people who had stood beside him through difficult years. But now every familiar face seemed different. Every memory carried new uncertainty. Across the room, Claire watched him. Even in her feline form, he could sense her concern. She had finally found a way to tell part of her story, only to be trapped once more by the curse. Ethan rubbed his temples and stood. There was only one path forward. He needed evidence. Not suspicions, not fears. Evidence. The following morning, he traveled to the capital under the pretense of attending routine council business. The white cat rode with him inside the carriage. During the 3-hour journey, Claire remained unusually alert. Every time they passed a familiar landmark, her ears twitched. Her eyes followed the roads as if old memories were resurfacing. By noon, they arrived at the Royal Administration Complex. The enormous stone building housed thousands of records dating back generations. If Claire had worked here before her disappearance, answers might still exist within its walls. Ethan entered through a private entrance and instructed his staff not to announce his visit. The fewer people who knew his purpose, the better. Claire followed close behind. Most people assumed she was simply a royal pet. The misunderstanding proved surprisingly useful. Hours passed as Ethan searched through archived correspondence and personnel records. Much of Claire's work history had been removed. Entire sections were missing. Pages had been replaced. References had vanished. Someone had carefully cleaned the trail. Yet whoever had done, it had not been perfect. Late in the afternoon, Ethan discovered a storage ledger hidden inside an outdated filing system. The document referenced restricted materials transferred 3 years earlier. The authorization signature caught his attention immediately. Victor Hawthorne. Ethan stared at the page. Once could be coincidence. Twice might raise questions. But Victor's name had now appeared repeatedly around every mystery connected to Claire. Ethan closed the file slowly. A cold feeling settled in his chest. He did not want to suspect Victor. The older man had helped raise him after his parents died. He had been advisor, mentor, and friend. Yet facts did not care about emotions. Facts simply existed. Suddenly, movement near the doorway caught Ethan's attention. Claire had wandered several feet away while he worked. Now she stood completely still. Her body looked tense, focused. Ethan followed her gaze. At the far end of the records hall stood a framed photograph taken years earlier during a royal ceremony. Dozens of officials appeared in the image. Claire stared at one figure in particular. Victor Hawthorne. Ethan approached slowly. The cat never looked away from the photograph. "Is it him?" he asked quietly. Claire immediately lowered her head once. Ethan's heartbeat accelerated. Then something unexpected happened. Claire moved toward the photograph and lightly touched the frame with her paw. Not Victor. Another person standing beside him. Ethan narrowed his eyes. The second figure wore formal council robes. His face was partially obscured by others in the picture. Ethan recognized him only after several seconds. Council archivist Daniel Mercer. The man responsible for maintaining official records 3 years ago. Ethan felt the pieces begin shifting into place. Victor had access. Mercer controlled the archives. Together they could have hidden almost anything. Before he could think further, a voice echoed from behind him. "Your Majesty." Ethan turned. One of the palace attendants hurried toward him carrying an envelope. "This arrived for you moments ago." Ethan accepted it. No sender was listed. He opened it immediately. Inside was a single sheet of paper, containing only one sentence. "Stop searching for Claire Whitmore. The past should stay buried." Ethan slowly lowered the letter. Across the hall, Claire stared at the message. Fear returned to her eyes. Because for the first time in 3 years, someone else knew she was no longer hiding alone. The anonymous warning changed everything. Ethan did not show fear when he folded the letter and slipped it into his coat pocket. But inside, his certainty hardened into resolve. Someone had monitored his investigation closely enough to know exactly what he was searching for. Someone had noticed Claire. The carriage ride back to Blackwood Ridge felt longer than usual. Rain clouds gathered above the mountains, casting long shadows across the forest roads. Claire sat beside him in silence, her gray eyes fixed on the passing landscape. Ethan noticed how often she glanced behind them, as though expecting trouble to emerge from the mist. When they finally arrived at the estate, he wasted no time. That evening, he summoned a special council session to be held 3 days later. Officially, It would be a review of royal administrative records. Unofficially, it was a trap. The invitation went to every senior official connected to the old investigation, including Victor Hawthorne and Daniel Mercer. If either man believed the past was buried, Ethan intended to force the truth into the light. Over the next 2 days, preparations continued quietly. Lady Miriam worked tirelessly with ancient texts, searching for a way to strengthen the cracks forming within Claire's curse. Ethan reviewed every document recovered from the hidden room. Piece by piece, a clearer picture emerged. Financial records had been altered. Official reports had vanished. Entire witness statements had been removed from the archives. Yet one detail stood above all others. Every alteration required authorization from both the Council Archives Office and the Royal Advisory Office. Daniel Mercer and Victor Hawthorne. The pattern could no longer be ignored. On the morning of the council session, the great hall filled with nobles, advisors, and administrators. Sunlight streamed through the tall stained glass windows, painting the marble floor with shades of gold and blue. Ethan sat upon the elevated royal chair, while dozens of eyes watched him expectantly. Claire remained hidden nearby, carried into the chamber inside a covered basket that appeared harmless to everyone else. The meeting began routinely. Reports were presented. Questions were asked. Formalities unfolded exactly as expected. Then Ethan stood. The room immediately fell silent. "Before we conclude," he said calmly, "there is one matter requiring clarification." He signaled to an attendant. Several documents were placed on the central table. Murmurs spread through the hall as officials recognized old records long believed forgotten. Ethan watched carefully. Most appeared confused. A few looked nervous. Daniel Mercer turned pale almost instantly. Victor Hawthorne remained composed, though something flickered behind his eyes. Ethan continued. 3 years ago, an investigation was abruptly closed. Records disappeared. Witnesses vanished from official reports. I would like an explanation. Silence answered him. Daniel swallowed visibly. Victor folded his hands. Your Majesty, Victor said smoothly. Those matters were resolved long ago. Ethan nodded slowly. That is interesting. He placed Claire's journal on the table. Because the records suggest otherwise. Shock rippled through the chamber. Several council members leaned forward. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan opened the journal to the final pages and read portions aloud. Claire's notes, her concerns, her warnings. Each sentence added weight to the growing tension. Daniel Mercer looked increasingly distressed. Sweat appeared along his brow. Victor remained silent. Then, unexpectedly, Daniel stood. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every eye turned toward him. His voice trembled. I never wanted this. The hall became so quiet that Ethan could hear the distant ticking of the ceremonial clock. Daniel lowered his head. I only followed instructions. Across the chamber, Victor Hawthorne's expression changed for the first time. And Ethan realized the moment Claire had waited 3 years for was finally beginning. The silence that followed Daniel. Mercer's confession felt heavier than any speech. Dozens of people sat frozen throughout the great hall. Some stared at Daniel. Others looked toward Victor Hawthorne. No one seemed certain what would happen next. Ethan remained standing beside the council table, his gaze fixed on the 2 men who had appeared again and again throughout Claire's investigation. Daniel looked exhausted. Years of fear seemed to weigh on his shoulders. Finally, he spoke. 3 years ago, Claire Whitmore discovered irregularities in the record system. She noticed documents being removed and replaced. At first, she thought it was a mistake. His voice shook. Then she found evidence proving it was deliberate. Murmurs spread through the hall. Ethan said nothing. Daniel continued. She came to me because I supervised the archives. She trusted me. Regret filled his eyes. I should have helped her. Across the room, Victor remained seated. Calm. Silent. Watching. Daniel lowered his head. Instead, I warned the wrong person. The hall erupted into whispers. Ethan raised one hand, and silence returned immediately. Why? He asked. Daniel swallowed hard. Because I was afraid. Victor controlled everything. Appointments. Funding. Access. I convinced myself that protecting my position mattered more than protecting the truth. Ethan felt disappointment settle heavily inside him. Not anger. Disappointment. Sometimes kingdoms were not damaged by monsters. Sometimes they were damaged by ordinary people choosing fear over courage. Then Victor finally stood. Every eye turned toward him. The older advisor looked around the hall slowly before speaking. I never intended for any of this. Ethan almost laughed at the familiar excuse. Victor sighed. The kingdom was unstable. Certain information would have created panic. I made difficult decisions to preserve order. By erasing records? Ethan asked. By silencing witnesses? Victor's expression hardened. By preventing chaos. For the first time, Ethan truly saw the difference between wisdom and control. Victor had spent years convincing himself they were the same thing. They were not. Before the discussion could continue, movement came from the covered basket near the front of the chamber. A silver glow emerged from within. Gasps spread across the room. Lady Miriam stepped forward immediately. The curse is breaking, she whispered. Ethan's heart skipped. Light spilled across the marble floor. Soft and brilliant. The entire hall watched as Claire emerged from the glow. No longer trapped. No longer hidden. Claire Whitmore stood before them in human form, her pale blonde hair falling over her shoulders and her gray eyes shining with emotion. For a moment, nobody spoke. Many had believed she was dead. Others had forgotten her entirely. Yet here she was, living proof that the truth could survive even the longest silence. Claire looked directly at Ethan, then at the council. Her voice trembled at first. I spent 3 years trying to be heard. The hall remained perfectly still. I thought nobody would ever listen. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Not because of the mystery, not because of the conspiracy, because he finally understood what she had endured. 3 years of isolation. 3 years of carrying the truth alone. Yet she had never given up. Claire turned toward the council. The truth does not disappear just because people hide it. No one argued. No one could. The evidence was overwhelming. The deception was exposed. The missing records were restored. The investigation reopened. Justice followed through lawful process in the weeks that came after. But that day belonged to Claire. Months later, spring sunlight bathed Blackwood Ridge in gold. The kingdom had healed. Trust was slowly returning. Ethan stood on a balcony overlooking the mountains when soft footsteps approached behind him. Claire joined him beneath the clear blue sky. No curses. No secrets. No fear. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ethan smiled. You know, everything changed because I opened a door during a storm. Claire laughed softly. And because you stopped to help a stray cat. Ethan looked at her. No. His voice was gentle. Because that stray cat never stopped protecting everyone else. Claire's eyes glistened. Far below, the forest stretched toward the horizon, bright with new life. And for the first time in years, both of them stood in the sunlight, free.